Christian societies have an unfortunate history of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a form of scapegoating. Something is going wrong in society and I need to find somebody to blame, and so I look for who might be different than me or who might be powerless or who I can kind of put my problems on. And historically, the Jews often live apart from the rest of the society, and so they're an easy scapegoat. And Christians have taken the social anxiety that results in scapegoating, and they put an intellectual wrapper around it. They'll look at the scriptures and say, well, the Jews rejected Jesus, and they rejected Paul and Barnabas, and so they have it coming. And we can't do that as Christians. We have to recognize the dynamic that's going on. The scapegoating impulse, the othering of a group of people, and then the intellectual wrapper around what we really just want to be true. A use of our faith in a way that the faith itself does not support. That said, there is a theological critique of Judaism which is legitimate. We cannot demonize Judaism in itself. We have to recognize that it is true revelation from God, that the Jews are God's chosen people in the Old Testament, that God intended Jesus to come from the Jews, and that the Jews remain having a very unique and special relationship with God. But Christianity will also say that there were things lacking in Judaism that were fulfilled and perfected in Jesus Christ. One of the theological critiques that Jesus makes of Judaism, that the apostles make of Judaism, is the same critique that the Jewish prophets made of Judaism. Isaiah, Amos, Ezekiel, all of those guys. And that's this. God chose the chosen people not for the sake of that choice. The choice was not the end. The choice was the means to a greater end, which was the salvation of the entire world. God's intention in choosing and working through the Jewish people is that their holiness in following the Torah, their worship, their true, authentic worship in the temple, would be so pure and so true to God that it would become attractive, and that all of the nations around the Jews would recognize in Jewish practice and worship the worship of the true God, and that the Jews, through their practice, would bring in all of these nations to that true worship. It's one of the main reasons why Jesus flipped the tables in the temple, because in the temple, the tables were set up in what was called the court of the Gentiles. That was the place where the Gentiles were supposed to come and experience Jewish worship so that they could be attracted to God. But the Jews of Jesus' time had forgotten that wider message and had excluded the Gentiles by setting up the marketplace in this place that was supposed to be for the evangelization of peoples. Now, I should say, the church would consider herself the chosen people of God. In a sense, the fulfillment in Jesus of what God did through the nation of Israel. So whatever critique we can make of the Jewish people of Jesus' time is a critique that we are also open to. Our church can very easily get in the mindset of saying, well, the point of being Catholic is to be Catholic. The point of doing all the things the church asks us to do is to maintain the purity of the church. Instead of saying, the point of being Catholic, robustly Catholic, orthodoxly Catholic, faithfully Catholic, is to evangelize the world. That our practices should be attractive. That people should see in us the worship, the true worship of Almighty God. And we should bring in those who are not here. Now, keeping that critique in mind, the separation for the sake of separation rather than the holiness for the sake of evangelization critique. In our first reading, Paul and Barnabas go to Antioch. They preach to the synagogue. They preach to the Jews because, as Jesus says in a different gospel, salvation is from the Jews. They're the ones who are prepared for Christ and salvation. That's where they begin. But then the next week, all of the Gentiles of Antioch, Antioch's a large city and it's a primarily Gentile area, they're coming out to listen to this preaching. And the mindset of the Jewish people at the time of Paul and Barnabas was separation. in order to be holy and follow God, we have to separate ourselves from the nations entirely. And so you cannot minister both to Jews and Gentiles. And so all these Gentiles are here listening to Paul and Barnabas, and the Jews that they were preaching to the week before are saying, well, you can't do both, right? It's either us or them. And the reading specifically describes them as jealous. They became jealous, and because of that, they drove Paul and Barnabas out of the city. Where does jealousy come from? Jealousy, by its very definition, comes from insecurity. Jealousy is saying, I need something that I don't have. I need something that somebody else has because I do not have that thing. Meaning that I am insecure in the things that I have. Material jealousy, for example, is saying that person has a boat, and I really want a boat, and I do not like the lack in my life. I am insecure in the fact that I do not have a boat, and so I become very jealous of their boat. That's material insecurity. I do not sufficiently appreciate the blessings that I have, therefore I need something that I don't have. There's social jealousy. I become jealous of other people's friends or family. Well, that's because I'm not happy with my friends or my family. There's that insecurity. And of course, there is spiritual jealousy. I'm looking at how that person prays or how that person interacts with the church or whatever else and saying, well, I'm jealous. I want what they have. Well, it's because I am not confident in my own prayer life or my own living of Catholicism or my own relationship to the church. We should not be surprised that the Jews in the first reading become jealous if the critique that I've been suggesting that Jesus has of the Jews of the time and that we should have of the church today is accurate. They knew that there was something incorrect or something kind of off about their relationship with God. They were insecure in that relationship, and so they could not stand somebody, Paul, a Jew, preaching then to the Gentiles. They couldn't deal with not having that strict separation. If we see jealousy, or jealousy will become bitterness and that becomes judgment, if we see jealousy, bitterness, or judgment in our life, we should ask ourselves, where's the insecurity? Because that's what God wants to heal. If I'm jealous of somebody's friends, I got to look at my friends. If I'm jealous of somebody's prayer, I got to look at my prayer. And I have to find a way to change my life so that I am confident in my friends or in my prayer or in my material possessions. Let me connect that to two more readings. In our gospel, Jesus says two things. He says, my sheep hear my voice, I know them, and they follow me. Hearing the voice of Jesus allows us to lock in on Jesus. He becomes our singular focus and everything fades away. It's sort of like a horse with blinders on. The only thing we have is the voice of Jesus, and that lets us follow him. If we're locked in on the voice of Jesus, if it's the only thing that we're hearing, then all of the other voices can't affect us. All of the things that we're worried about or insecure about, they can't affect us. Because I have my relationship with the Lord, and that's all I need. Jesus also says, my Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one can take them out of the Father's hand. If we're locked in on Jesus, if we're secure in our relationship with God, then we cannot be removed from God. And ultimately, our relationship with God is the only relationship that matters. If I'm good with God, then I'm good with everything. If I'm good with God, I can survive turmoil in my family or my friends. I can survive doubts in my faith because God will help me resolve those. I can survive material insecurity because I'm good with God and nothing else matters. It's, by the way, how we get Christian martyrs. So in our second reading from Revelation, this is an image of the Gentile martyrs. In the verses before this, we hear about the 144,000. That's a sign of all of the Jews who are saved, because it's 12 times 12 times 1,000. When you hear 12, you should think Israel. Everything 12 has a relationship to Israel, to the chosen people, and ultimately, eventually, to the church and the 12 apostles. 12 times 12 is just 12ing 12, which means that it's super 12. It's the most 12 thing you can think of. So it's the most Israel thing you can think of. And then 1,000 just means it's a big number. So we see the salvation of the Jews in the 144,000. But here we have a numberless array of people from all over the world. That's the Gentiles. And the Gentiles are described as having white robes washed clean in the blood of the Lamb, which means that these are Gentile martyrs. How do we get martyrdom? And martyrdom is, I would say, unique to Christianity. There are people who will die for their faith, but they're very small numbers relative to the number of Christian martyrs. Or there are large numbers of people who will die in an aggressive manner for their faith. But a Christian martyr is always passive. A Christian martyr is never saying, well, I'm a martyr because, I wanted to kill somebody for my faith and I died on the way. A Christian martyr is a martyr because somebody wanted to kill me and I wouldn't abandon my faith and I allowed myself to be killed. That is unique to Christianity. How does Christianity have a large number of that kind of martyr? It's because we are deeply, deeply secure in our relationship to God. We are locked in on the voice of Jesus, and we follow him. And because of that, nothing else matters, including the persecutions of the world, including those who would wish to kill us or exile us. Nothing matters. I'm locked in on God. Everything else fades away. And so we have a numberless army of martyrs in heaven because Christians have true revelation. We know God as he truly is. We can hear his voice most clearly and most powerfully. And because it's so clear, we can follow him without distraction, including the distraction of those who wish to kill us. My friends, be confident in your relationship to God. Do what you need to do to be confident in the way the Lord is blessing. Be confident in the material blessings he has given you, because they are sufficient for what you need. Be confident in your family and friends, because if those relationships are godly, then they will be fruitful. And then be particularly confident in your relationship to God. Do what you need to do to follow the Lord faithfully. And if you do so, if you lock in on the voice of Jesus, you will follow him without distraction, which means that you will follow him in peace, in fidelity, in strength, and in fruitfulness. The Lord is the Good Shepherd, and if you are confident in his voice, you can be confident in all things.